This is the remediation video for the quadratic formula for Algebra 2. What will you learn in this video? You're going to learn what is the quadratic formula, when it's best to use it. We'll talk about how we can use the discriminant formula and what it tells you. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about the common mistakes that I saw on the test and to make sure that you don't make them again on the retake. So first we're going to talk a little bit about quadratics before we get into the quadratic formula. So here I do have a quadratic, and I like this visual because it shows you how to identify A, B, and C. Now the thing that's really important that most people forgot, again a common mistake on the exam, was you have to write the terms in order. That means that we look at the exponents and we start with the biggest one, should be x squared. Next would be x to the first, and then the last one would have no x, okay? You have to write it in the correct order to be able to identify A, B, and C. If you don't write in the correct order, that means you've identified A, B, and C incorrectly. So to give you a little bit of an example, okay, here's a quadratic. But again, it's not in order, right? So if I had to rearrange it, I want the x squared term first. Then I want the group that has x. And then I want the group that does not have x. And this would be the correct order to put it in so that I have A, B, and C. Okay, so once you do that, right, have it in order, and you always make sure that it equals 0. So always equals 0. Then you can identify A, B, and C, and then we'll actually use the quadratic formula and substitute. So first I want to talk a little bit about quadratic equations. First, I want you to write equals 0 here, because we said equation, that means equals. I did put a picture of the calculator Desmos, just to kind of give you an understanding of when do we use the quadratic formula and when do we not. So the reason I put this here is because we learned this in the previous unit. So this is a quadratic graph in the shape of a U. And remember that there's different words you can use for finding the answers. For example, you could use the word solutions, factors, roots, zeros, or x-intercepts. Those all mean the same thing. The solution to this graph, right, or the factors or the roots or whatever, all of that is where the graph touches the x-axis. Okay, so in this case, the solutions are -6 and +2. You can also see the factors are -6, +2, roots are -6, +2, zeros are -6, +2, and the x-intercepts are -6 and +2. It's all the same thing. Okay, the reason that this is important is those numbers are not complicated. They're not a decimal. They're easy to find. So when we're solving this and we don't have a graph and we can't put into a calculator, how do we know that it's going to be a problem like that? Well, we always try the x method first because that's the quickest method. So again, I call this the x method. So on top we do A times C, on the bottom we do it better adds to B. So let's identify A, B, and C. This equation is correctly in order. It also equals 0, so that means that my A, B, and C are correct. So the first step is to do A times C, which is -12. And then B, the +4, goes on the bottom. So out to the side, I'm going to write my factors of 12, which would be 1 times 12, 2 times 6, and 3 times 4. That means that I have 4 options to find the answers. Okay, so one of those is going to be correct. The problem is I want to make sure that it adds to +4. It adds or subtracts to +4. So in this case, the only way I can get it is with 2 and with 6. So I have 2 options. I can either put a negative with the 2, or I can put a negative with the 6. So you're going to try both of these out. Now, you can type them in the calculator, or you can just use your mind. So for the first one, -2 plus 6 is the same as 6 minus 2. That would be +4. 2 minus 6 would be -4, and that doesn't work. Okay, so I know that the negative has to be with the 2. So then we're going to write out the final answer with 2 sets of parentheses. We're going to use the variable in the problem. In this case, the variable is n. And then I'm going to write down the 2 answers that we got, -2 and +6. So this is called factored form but I want the solutions, okay? So that means that either you can set these equal to 0, or the faster way is just change the sign. So if it's a -2 there, now it becomes positive. If it's a +6 there, now it's going to become negative. Okay, and then if you check, it should be +2, -6, and that's exactly what we got in the graph. Again, but what if you don't have a graph? This is how you would solve it by hand using the X method. So the X method is faster than doing the formula. But what happens if, like this one, for example, again, if we look at the graph, they're decimals. That's a big hint to me. I know I cannot do the X method. But again, most of the problems on the test, you're not going to have a graph. So how do you know? So the best way you know is you try the X method, and if it doesn't work, then you know that you have to use the quadratic formula. So let's start. So first for this problem, we need to make sure that it equals 0, which it doesn't. So that means that I need to bring my -10 group to the other side. So I'm going to copy everything down. And then the -10 is negative. When it crosses the line, I change the sign. So it's positive now. And then we're going to combine like terms. So -13 plus 10 would be -3. Okay, now I have my quadratic, and I'm going to do the X method. Okay, so X method, if you remember, is A times C better add to B. So A is 2, B is -7, and C is -3. So we're going to multiply 2 times -3 is -6, and then the B is -7. I'm going to do factors of 6 out to the side. I have 1 times 6, and I have 2 times 3. Okay, so here I need to determine which option is going to get me to -7. So most people would think, oh, I could do 1 and 6. So I could do -1 and -6, right? Because that together adds -7. Perfect. The problem is it doesn't work for the top. I have to multiply. -1 times -6, right? Negative times negative is positive, but I need a negative. So it's impossible. It doesn't work. There's absolutely no option here that's going to get you to -7 and -6. So this doesn't work. We cannot use this method. So when you can't use the X method, that's when you know, oh, I need to use the quadratic formula. So we're going to do the quadratic formula now. -b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac over 2a. Okay, anytime you see a variable here or letter, put parentheses. Okay, and now we're going to substitute. So first we're going to do b, and b is -7. Next, we're going to do A, and A is +2. And then the last one we're going to do is C, and C is -3. And now we can simplify. So we're going to do it in 3 sections. The 3 sections that we're going to do are these. We're going to do this section, and then the inside of the root. So negative and negative would make that 7 positive. Then we have plus minus. On the bottom we have 2 times 2, which is 4. We have the root, and then the inside we can type into your TI-84 calculator. So that's what we're going to do. So here's my TI-84. We're going to do parentheses, -7, parentheses, squared, minus 4, parentheses, and then we have a 2 and a -3. 2, -3, enter. And the answer is 73. So inside this root, I have the answer 73. Now the last part where people got a lot of this wrong on the test was that they forgot to write their 2 options. So we got to look at the sign right here, plus or minus. That means in the first one we're going to do plus, and the second one we're going to do minus. So the first one is 7 plus the square root of 73 over 4. The second one is 7 minus the square root of 73 over 4. Again, this is why the answer was a decimal in the graph. This is why we had to use the quadratic formula, is because you cannot get this answer from doing the x method. Now, if you like the quadratic formula, technically, yes, you could use it for all the problems, but most of the time using the x method is faster if it's that type of problem. Okay, really quick, we're going to go into the special case, missing term. I'm not going to solve this whole problem, but I am going to say that it has to equal 0. So I have 5r squared, and then I have the 80 became negative, right, because it cross line changed the sign. And then I have to put in a placeholder. I'm going to highlight this, okay, because we need to be in descending order. Okay, so we have r squared, r1, and then a number. So we were missing the middle term. Okay, if you don't put that 0, the placeholder, you're not going to be able to identify A, B, and C correctly. Okay, so now let's just try the x method just to show you how it does not work when we use the quadratic formula. So A times C would be negative 40, and then B would be 0. So I'm going to do factors of 40. 1 times 40, 2 times 20, 4 times 10, 5 times 8. Okay, none of these options are going to get me to 0. So this way does not work. I have to do the quadratic formula. Okay. Now, just because we have 0 for B does not mean we need to be afraid to use it. So remember, put parentheses for each variable. And then we're going to substitute. So B is 0. B is 0. We have A is 5. And then our last case is C is negative 80. Okay, so again, with this negative 0, we can cancel it out, but do not get rid of your plus minus. 2 times 5 and 1 would be 10, and then I have the square root of 0 squared minus 4 parentheses 5 parentheses negative 80. So let's write that down in the calculator. Parentheses 0 parentheses squared minus 4 parentheses 5 negative 80. Enter. 1,600. Okay, so now let's simplify. It's going to be plus or minus, and let's check the square root. So we're going to do second, the square root is down here, of 1,600 is 40. So this simplifies to 40. Now again, we're still not complete, so let's make sure that we simplify. 40 divided by 10 is 4. But again, we have two options. So option 1 is the answer is 4, positive, or option 2, the answer is negative 4. Okay, and we got that using the quadratic formula. Now, the last part we're going to talk about is the discriminant. So really quick, the discriminant is literally the inside part of the quadratic formula. So let me go back up and show you. Okay, so the inside part of the quadratic formula is right here in the root. B squared minus 4AC. So a common mistake that was made on the exam is when people are doing the discriminant, they kept putting the root. But if you look here, there is no root. So just to give you a visual about what these options mean over here, okay, they're talking about that when you have a graph, they're talking about the number of solutions. This one touches the x-axis 2 times, so that's 2 solutions. This one touches one time, that's one solution, and this one does not touch x at all, so it is 0 real solutions. Okay. All you have to know is that if it's greater than 0, that means it's a positive number. If it's equal to 0, it's one real solution. And then if it's less than 0, that means negative numbers. Okay, so if you solve for the discriminant, right, you plug in b, a, and c into this, and the number is negative, then we would know there are 0 real solutions. Or if your answer was positive, we would know there are 2 real solutions. So we're going to do a couple of examples, and again, you have to use this formula. Let's zoom in. So we're going to do b squared minus 4ac. Okay, this one equals 0. This one does not. This one equals 0. So for the first one, we're good. It equals 0. We can start with a is 6, b is negative 2, c is negative 3. We're going to substitute. Okay, so b is negative 2, a is 6, and c is negative 3. You're going to type all of that into Desmos. Not Desmos. Woo! The TI-84 calculator. So you're going to put parentheses, negative 2 squared minus 4 parentheses, and then 6 and negative 3. Enter. So the answer is positive 76. So that's a positive number, which means that it has 2 solutions. How do I know that? From the chart that you do have to memorize. So again, positive number, 2 real solutions. Okay. The second example that we're going to go over quickly is non-standard form, so we have to rearrange it to make sure that it equals 0. So I have 4a squared. A is positive, now it becomes negative. Negative 4 is negative, now it becomes positive. All right, now I can identify A, B, and C. Okay, so we're going to do b squared minus 4ac. Okay, so b squared would be negative 8 squared. A is 4 and C is 4. Okay, now you're going to type all of that into the calculator. So you're going to go parentheses negative 8 parentheses squared minus 4 parentheses, and the answer is 0. So if the answer is 0, that means it has 1 solution. Okay, the last one is equal to 0, so we can quickly identify A, B is negative 1, C is negative 1. Okay, we're going to do b squared minus 4ac. We're going to substitute. B is negative 1, A is negative 2, C is negative 1. Okay, so we have negative 1 squared minus 4 times negative 2 times negative 1. So I'll do it by hand. Negative 1 squared is 1. And then we have negative 4 times negative 2 is positive 8. Times negative 1 would be negative 8, which would be negative 7. So the answer should be that it's negative 7. But remember, negative numbers means that there are 0 solutions, that the graph does not touch the x-axis. All right, good luck on the exam.